On the 17th of April 2025, history was made in European football. Bodø Glimt had just beaten Lazio in the second leg of the Europa League quarter-finals, securing their place in the semi-final against Tottenham Hotspur. You see, Bodø Glimt aren't just an underdog. It almost seemed like a miracle for the Norwegian club to even be there. To paint the picture, Bodø Glimt like to recruit local. Why is that relevant? Well, the entire population of Bodø could fit inside the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium with nearly 30,000 seats to spare. The way the club has achieved such success is unconventional, but it got results. Let me explain. In the town of Bodø, Norway, lies a remarkable club. Situated at their 8,000-seater home, Aspmyra Stadium, the club has undergone a seismic evolution. In 2016, Bodø Glimt were relegated to the second division. European nights in Rome were nothing but a pipe dream at this point, but this moment was a trigger for change. The team was a counter-attacking side that tended to oscillate around the bottom half of the first division and top half of the second, but this relegation in particular led to an interesting appointment. The board looked at their team and saw the quality. It was a mentality problem, so they looked at unconventional solutions, and that solution was beyond Mannsverk. Mannsverk had recently given up active tours of duty that included missions over Afghanistan and Libya as a fighter pilot. A colleague in his squadron had spoken to someone at Bodø Glimt and wondered if he could help. There was just one problem. Mannsverk had little interest in football. Still, he agreed, but only on two conditions. First, players would have to see him voluntarily. He would not speak to anyone who was told to see him. Second, he would not be their agent. I said I won't go out and push decisions on players in favour of the club. Mannsverk told ESPN, I will be there for the player. Mannsverk, who was not being paid and later said it was more like a hobby at first, also had a question for the bosses. What if a player tells me they do not want to play football anymore? What if he wants to leave the club? I will support them in those decisions, and are you ready for that risk? It was a big danger for a club to take on a man they didn't even pay, that he wouldn't be at their benefit but for the players. Yet they jumped on board, sensing it might help, and help it did. Glimt won promotion back to the top flight in 2017. The transformation had begun, but this risky masterstroke wasn't the sole reason the club achieved such dominance. As they entered the first division once more, Kjetil Knutsen was promoted from assistant head coach when Asmund Bjørkan became director. It was the first season back in the top flight, and they were struggling, having won only 3 of their first 14 games. Yet while results were not always going their way, there was hope. Calvinus, who had played with Knutsen at Vareg, joined as assistant coach, and together they set about revolutionising the club. But Knutsen's first priority was clear. He wanted Calvinus to instill the training culture in the squad, hammer it home that this is the Bodø way, and it was a non-negotiable. Training became everything. Enter murder ball. Marcelo Bielsa inspired training drills designed to create a level of intensity and standards in the club that Norwegian football had never seen before. The purpose was to make relentlessness instinctive, not just tactical. What Calvinus was struck by was the players' attitude. I felt that I really liked the attitude of the players, how they were reacting to our coaching, how open-minded they were about feedback, how, if we were training for 1 hour, then all 60 minutes are of the same level of intensity. What I mean by that is if you do some simple passing drills at the beginning of the sessions, then you get the players as focused even when you're working on simple details. Another factor in training was to overtrain, not in a way that would create injuries, but to work beyond what you expect of the opponent. A good example of this was when they played Celtic in the Europa League. The week leading up to the game was designed to counter Ange Postecoglou's high press. They made the space smaller and played with a higher intensity than what was expected at the game. They went on to win 5-1 across 2 legs. The intense training sessions were not the only attributes Knutsen adapted from Bielsa, but his tactical framework too. They were still known as a counter-attacking team, but Knutsen wanted to evolve. In 2019, he set out diversifying how the team plays. They wanted to keep the counter-attacking effectiveness while also moving up the pitch, pressing higher up. When there was an opportunity to play and keep possession, they would. The second ambition was owning their counter-attacking heritage to be as effective as possible. The headline of the football we were working on was forward football. Calvinus continues. We kept working on how to defend, but when you get opportunities to counter-attack, you counter with good passes and good runs. Meanwhile, Mannsverk introduced his own innovations. He suggested players meditate, wearing their kits every morning before training. This was taken from his experience as a pilot, where he would sit in his flight suit in the cockpit and meditate. The biggest part of the club's philosophy became not viewing everything through the prism of a scoreboard. League tables, points, and cup runs no longer defined their success. Instead, they focused solely on process, on what they could control. Mannsverk had made Bodø Glimt mentality monsters going into every game. As their first season back in the top flight had started poorly, perhaps most clubs had looked at making a change. but that was never a thought for Buda and Knutsen's position. It paid off, and over time they went on to achieve unprecedented dominance in the Norwegian top flight. First consolidation, then a second place finish, and then glory. Buda Glimt won their first Norwegian league title in the club's history, breaking records for points accumulated and goals scored in a Norwegian top flight season. Some argue they were the greatest domestic side in Norwegian football history, but what was on the horizon was not part of the plan. Just want to pop in real quick and ask if you haven't already to hit that subscribe button. We've been having a bit of a rebrand at Parabellia and the content will be coming more regularly, so if you enjoy these kinds of videos, subscribe. Thanks. After their incredible 2020 season, Buda Glimt was struggling to replicate those highs during the first few months of the 2021 campaign. They were knocked out of the Champions League first round qualifiers by Legia Warsaw, and by matchday 11 of 30, they were 6th in the league table. Cynics were revisiting Glimt's miraculous 2020 as an anomaly. That's the Arctic Circle based club that had their moment in the limelight. Glimt were plagued by injuries. At one stage, all of their wingers were out of action, but there was also something of a performance lull. The application in training and attitude to games was just as single-minded, but it was just not clicking in practice. It was down to resolve. How long could the board stick with this plan? Ultimately they did, and finished the season strongly. Glimt went the final 19 games of the season unbeaten and won their second successive league title on the final match day, a 3-0 win over Mjøndalen. They also qualified for the Europa Conference knockout stages, having taken 4 points off Roma in the group phase. The club has now built a successful model that will be in place long after Knutsen has moved on. The recruitment at the club is one of the most challenging aspects, being in such a remote area of Europe. Attracting players is always difficult, but they work in their confines in an extremely effective way. Calvinus breaks down the recruitment into 2 essentials. The first is their suitability to the Glimt system and to the training culture. Will the players fit? And if not, can they be integrated anyway if they have a lot to offer? The second is having an X factor, one compelling characteristic that might be overlooked by traditionally bigger sides because they're not the finished article. Because they can't go out and buy the best players, they have to be smart and pragmatic by their approach. A good example is looking at their forwards from the past couple of seasons. Striker Eric Botham, then 21, was brought from Rosenborg to replace Juncker and settled quickly, contributing 14 league goals. They also had a journeyman forward, Amal Pellegrino, was brought from Saudi Arabia and after an initial struggle adjusted to Glimt's intense style. Although bought in 2020, Ola Solbakken was ready to step into the starting 11. All 3 represented different facets of Glimt's shrewd recruitment: the young prodigy to polish and sell off for a profit, the experienced head with unheralded quality and untapped potential in Pellegrino, and the more raw talent who needs more patience to come in Solbakken. Yet how do these players always seem to succeed? The answers come from what is their challenge, but also what is their benefit. Isolation. The club being so far away from the high expectations of the top leagues in Europe allow for each player to have the time to develop without the laser-focused scrutiny. A lot of Buda Glimt signings have been slow starters and often needing 6 to 12 months to fully adapt and show their qualities, but time is a luxury that the Norwegian club can give them. They are now under the spotlight in many ways. More clubs are recruiting Buda's players, creating more headaches as star players are being sold at a more frequent rate. Buda Glimt continue to defy expectations. Many thought it was a flash in the pan, but 4 titles in the previous 6 seasons would say otherwise. They continue to lose key players, and even the manager is being mooted for a move to the Premier League. He was reportedly on Brighton and Hove Albion's list before they appointed Roberto De Zerbi in 2022, and had interest from Ajax and Celtic the following summer. As he has been the guiding light throughout this period, there's an element of an unknown if he were to leave Glimt, but the club is confident that their culture, akin to Liverpool's famous boot room succession plan, is strong enough to continue rising. They beat a Jose Mourinho-led Roma 6-1 in the 21-22 Europa Conference League group stage. They thrashed Ange Postecoglou's Celtic 5-1 over 2 legs in the playoff round in February of 2022. Mansverk has not gone unnoticed either. Other clubs have approached Buda Glimt, asking for their secrets to success. Mansverk, who prefers the title culture builder to mental coach, has been offered jobs at other teams. I tell them no, I can't. I'm with Buda. He says, they sometimes say, okay, do you have another fighter pilot or a military guy? It's like, okay, you didn't get it. That's why we are not afraid of sharing what we do, because we know it's so hard to actually do it. Because the success of Buda Glimt isn't down to copying Bielsa's methods or hiring an ex-military mental coach. It is the collective of the whole club. The building of a dynasty that is continuing to defy expectations. So when a mysterious Norwegian club came to the Tottenham Hotspur Arena and ultimately lost in their semi-final of the Europa League, they had already won in so many other ways, and they aren't going away anytime soon.